So I was listening to a Sam Harris podcast the other day. You've heard me talk about Sam Harris. I don't know if you've ever actually listened to him.
No.
He's a deep thinker. I know you probably wouldn't like it. He actually thinks through his
Intellect?
He's one of the smarts.
He's one of those people that are learned.
Yeah, he's one of those learned folks. But he has a podcast called Making Sense, and it's behind a paywall, most of them, so you can subscribe. I think it's $8 a month.
Yeah.
And you get the full conversation. If you do the free version, you get like half of it. It cuts off in the middle. It's kind of annoying. So I just went ahead and bought the full version. But he was talking to a professor the other day named Russ Roberts, who wrote a book called Wild Problems. Mm-hmm. And they were having a conversation in the episodes. Its most recent one. It's called Steps in the Right Direction. And they were basically just having a conversation about life and the problems that we face in life and how do we know the right decisions and where do we turn, and just really it was a really good discussion. A lot of things that we talk about.
Okay.
And just making sense of life really is I guess the overall theme. And there were a couple of points that stuck out that they were going back and forth on and arguing about. I want to throw them out to you and just get your thoughts and see what your perspective is.
Okay.
In other words, there's no right or wrong answers here. I'm just curious about what you think and your reaction to some of this stuff. So I've got 4 points here that I took from that episode that I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on. The first thing they were talking about tame problems versus wild problems. And again, he wrote a book. I actually just ordered it. It came in yesterday, so I'm excited to dive in because of the conversation was so good. But he defines tame problems as ones that we can solve through facts, data, roadmaps, recommendations, etc. Is this restaurant a good restaurant? Well, let me get on Yelp and see the reviews. That's a tame problem. I can go look at research and data to help me solve this problem.
Okay.
Versus a wild problem, something like these problems are data and evidence aren't as easily measurable. So should I take this job opportunity? Should I marry this girl? Should we have children? Mm-hmm. So he separates problems in life. One are tame. There's data, there's reasoning, there's logic that I can put behind and make this decision. And then there's the bigger problems, these wild problems that are just a little more abstract, a little harder to figure out. There is no concrete right answer. You have some background reference when making the decision, but you've never been married before, or at least you weren't whenever you married Tiff. How do I know? How do I know I should marry her? So it's just a fascinating discussion on tame problems versus wild problems.
Sorry, is there a question?
No, just your reaction to that.
I mean, it's good, and what I think, and I didn't hear this discussion. I'm sure they spoke about it. I'd imagine that a lot of people put the tame problems in the wild problems category.
Yes,
and make decisions more complicated than they need to be. Because we're constantly making decisions, and some people just stress. I think, if you can take a breath and you can calm down and you can, okay, look, I'm just going to unbiasedly just assess the situation as if I'm a third person, like remove myself from the situation. Now, if I'm going to give somebody else some advice on this exact topic, okay, how would I guide them?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, that gives you a kind of fresh perspective on it, as opposed to like, this is the biggest deal ever. Like, I don't know how to finish this project, or I don't know how to finish this report, or I don't know how to finish it, and I've got to do this. It's like, okay, take a breath. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how would you guide? Okay. And a lot of times you can give yourself the guidance and advice to go find the answers that are pretty readily available. I think of like, real estate is one of those. It falls into that category. Now, the decision on certain things, but hey, is this a good deal? There's information out there to find if this real estate investment is a good deal or not. Okay, what's it priced at? What are the comparables in the market? Okay, hey, what is the investment income that comes off of it? What are the lease rates? What are the market lease rates? Do I have the capital? Do I have investors? How is this? There's answers that you can put in, and if you actually just write it down on paper, pros and cons, then you could
That's a tame problem.
That would be a tame problem.
Right.
But we make it a big problem because it has a big dollar figure attached to it. Right. And one of the things my dad always said, anytime I had a decision that I was struggling with, he's like, pros and cons, just list it out.
Yeah. That's
because
wise.
When it just takes you back, because it's like, okay, now I'm going to think of, okay, what are the good things? What are the bad things? And there's a little bit of skill in that, because sometimes if you're leaning one way, you're going to stack one side versus the other. But like unbiasedly, as a third person, if I'm looking at the scenario from the outside, what are the positives? What are the negatives? And really, when you look at those, like let's just say you have a lot of positives, but just a few negatives, you can even still look at it, because some of those negatives may be really big, like really big. Mm-hmm. You may only have 2 or 3 negatives, but those 2 negatives outweigh the 10 positives. And it's very clear, but like looking at it, it really does help provide clarity.
Yeah. And the example he used for a wild problem, having children, so to your point, you could sit there and list pros and cons of having children. He said that the difficulty is, children is one of those things you could list 100 cons and maybe only have 2 pros. Mm-hmm. And even the pros that you do list or that you do have in your head, it's hard to magnify until you actually have your children. You can't quantify having children and the joy that it brings you until you actually have them. Yeah. So on paper, this is a terrible decision. Why? And it's funny, he uses the analogy of, why would I want to chase a bunch of 3-year-olds around a soccer field telling them not to bunch up? Like, that sounds horrible to me. Yeah. Why would I want to do that? Yeah. So on paper, it's like, this is an illogical decision to have children. You're giving up your time, you're giving up your energy, you're giving up money that you've worked hard for. You're giving up so much when you have children, and yet many of us choose to proceed because you just can't quantify the positive side of it. Yep. And he said, that's a wild problem. You're not going to be able to have the answer whenever you're making this decision on these wild problems. For sure. You're not going to know for sure. You've never done this before. Uh-huh. But you're making the best decision you can you can think of at the moment, and moving forward and being okay with that. Yeah.
So funny. I don't know why. There's a guy on Instagram. It's a must. If you're a parent, it's a must follow. It's Simon Holland.
I've heard of him.
He is hilarious. It's all dad parent jokes. But he says, let's get married and have kids. So instead of trying a pumpkin beer, you can stop the crying while I go back into the corn maze to find a shoe. I mean, he has.
That's the thing that 2 dads will laugh at.
Yes.
If you don't have kids, you're like, yeah, totally. But that's funny. And it's like, no, I choose that because of the joy and and it's hard. And again, he says, even the most eloquent people can't explain why they want to have kids, for instance.
That's right.
But it's just a feeling you get when you have them.
You literally, and like we had a couple football games again this weekend, and
that's a good example. It's like you're giving up your entire, like, dude, if you had the choice to do anything in your life, I'm guessing watching a bunch of kids.
Pre-kids.
Yeah, I'm guessing watching a bunch of kids isn't literally on top of your list.
We left the house at 6:45 because we had to buy snacks because it was snack day, and we didn't have snacks for the kids. And so we had to leave the house at 6:45, and we didn't get home that night until 7:30. All day. We were in 5 different towns all day, and pre-dad, I'm like, that sounds
like hell.
Miserable. And I would not trade that day. That was the greatest day ever.
And there's no logic behind that.
No.
There's nothing that explains that should make sense.
No, I know.
But it does.
I know. I mean, it really is true. But when you come to these wild problems, and I think of, I've got a client who I've become really close with, and his daughter's a highly recruited basketball player, and deciding what college to go to. Like, that's a big decision. And that's really, like, that's a wild problem. Like, really, like, yeah, I can go to the best program. I can figure out who has the best academics, who has this. But like, a lot is dictated your college experience as an athlete on your program, your coach, how long the coach is going to stay. Are they going to move? What your opportunity there is, what division you're in, how much exposure, what my goals are after. Like, that's a hard decision.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are real problems. But that is where community and wisdom comes into play. Absolutely. Right? That is where you lean on people that have been through experiences and been through things, because those wild problems may not be the exact same situation, but they've lived enough life, either they themselves or have experienced it alongside someone else, that they can at least help you navigate or ask questions that become the most important questions. Because the problem is, a lot of times for me, is I just don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Like if I face a problem, I don't know what question to ask. I don't know where to start. It's too big to comprehend. So typically I just don't do anything. And I just like hesitate.
Yeah.
Where being around community, being around wisdom, man, that's such an invaluable tool in those wild problem type scenarios.
And that was his point, is, because I'm the same, I'm a very much an analytical.
Yeah.
When it comes to problems, when it comes to big decisions, I'm I've got a, paralysis by analysis. I've got to weigh all the pros and cons. Mm-hmm. And that was his point, is these wild problems don't have a right answer.
No.
They have maybe a better answer.
Yeah.
But you're never gonna have enough facts and data to determine that this is the right answer for me.
Yeah, and I feel like the name of our show, One Shot, like it should lead us to one side or the other. And maybe it's like, hey, we're going to speak it into fruition by naming our show this, because both you and I are very similar to that. Like we put our house on the market, right? And it was one of those kind of on a whim, like, and I'm like, no, hold on. Like, we got to look at like the economics here. Right. We got to, what's our, like, where are we at right now? Interest rates are starting to, this was in August, like the real estate market's actually cooled down. Like, we got to get that. There's all these deals. And I'm like, no. My wife is like, I wish that I could be more like her. She's like, look, let's do it and let's figure it out. Like, if we in our heart have a good feeling about it, let's do it and let's figure it out. Like, let's trust. And this is where, like, for me, faith, like, is a big part of my family and our decisions. Is like, look, if we feel confident that God is leading us towards something, and that's really Him, and we the problem is, you never know. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't have an audible answer from Him, like, yes, go do this. But it's like, okay, look, we're going to try to be faithful with the best that we can. And you know what? We're just going to figure it out. And that, like, she's so good at that. She's just like, look, let's do it. Let's figure it out. And then there's times that it hasn't worked out for us. But most of the time it does. And guess what? The times it hasn't worked out in these wild problems, even if you make the wrong decision, guess what? You're going to be smarter, more experienced. And that's where that wisdom comes from.
And that actually leads into the next point that I picked out. And it says, even a well-lived life will be full of mistakes, wrong turns, and regrets. There is no safe approach. This mentality should give you the confidence to take risks.
Yeah.
And I love that, because that's exactly what you're talking about. Even if you made the wrong decision, so what?
Yeah.
Or the what you perceive as the wrong decision. Yeah. So what? You're gonna have mistakes. You're gonna make bad decisions. You're gonna have regrets.
Yeah.
That's what life is.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be this pure, 100% positive all the time. Mm-hmm. Nobody's gonna get out that way.
Nobody is.
So understanding should give you the confidence to try to make more decisions off the cuff, if you will.
Yeah.
Because you're knowing, if it doesn't work out, we'll pivot, do something else.
Or it's not going to work out like I originally thought, which it never does anyway.
Never does anyway.
Like, if you do take that like leap of faith and like lean into that decision, it's never going to be like you planned. Even if it's close, it's still going to be different. But it may not work out, but you're going to learn from it. You're going to be wiser. You're going to be more resilient. You're going to be more courageous. You're going to be, again. Now, I do think that the risk factor and just, hey, you're not going to make the right decisions. Like, I do think that you do need to put collars on your decision making, right? Like, there's certain things that I'm not going to step out of.
Yeah.
Right? Like, morally, whether it's spiritually for you, whether it's, because again, it's like, oh man, it's a risk, but I'm trying to weigh the pros and cons of having this affair, Yeah. It's like, okay, look, yeah, that's a terrible decision. Like, that's a bad decision. But like, I wouldn't encourage it like that as like a wisdom teacher. Right. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
well, I made mistakes, so
yeah, you know what? Got to take a risk. Ben and Tyler said, you're going to screw up. Just learn from it. It's like, look, put some collars within your decision-making skills. If it doesn't hurt anybody else, right? It's not at the expense of someone else. you've got to frame it there, because you've got to make these decisions in a way that honors who you believe yourself to be and doesn't jeopardize that as well.
Yeah. Just again, I tend to think, and I don't know why I think this way, but I tend to think things are always going to be on the up and up. They're always going to project. There's never going to be a downside. There's never going to be a plateau. Yeah. It's just always supposed to rise up and to the right for me on the chart.
Yeah.
And I forget that, no, there's going to be times I'm going to screw up. There's going to be times that this plan doesn't work. Yeah. There's going to be times, and that's okay. Yeah. There's no, again, like I said a second ago, there's no escaping that. Yeah. Not one single person can escape a mistake or a regret. Mm-hmm. That's what makes things worth going for. Yeah. That's what makes those lessons learned.
Because how are you going to and we talk about this all the time, right? Like creating discomfort, creating scenarios where you're challenging yourself so that when the real ones do happen, like you're prepared for it. But guess what? If you don't make those bad decisions, how are you going to be prepared when a really big bad decision is in front of you? And how do you react to that? How do you recover from that? Like it really is. It's just we talked about it last week, right? Is, don't pray for an easy life. Mm-hmm. Pray for the strength to sustain a hard life. That's right. And so it's just one of those deals. It's like you are not going to create the tools that allow you to maximize this one shot we have at life if you aren't going through those hard, difficult, traumatic times.
Yeah. And that's easy to say, here on Monday morning in the air conditioning.
Yeah,
it's a little harder when you're facing the crucible. 100%. It's a lot harder when you're facing the crucible. 100%. But I'm with you. It's a good reminder during the crucible of why you're going through it. And again, I know it's hard to have that perspective, but we've said this before. How many times do you look back on the, quote, worst thing that ever happened to you and think that was the best thing that ever happened to me?
100%.
Because of what I learned from it, because of the path it's led me on. This is a dumb example, but I use it because it was such a big part of my life. Yeah. How many times I quit early on. Yeah. And during the time, it was emotional decisions. It was quick. It was, this feels good in the moment. I'm done. And what that's taught me now, I sit back and I think, man, I wish I hadn't have quit football my freshman year in high school. I wish I hadn't quit baseball my sophomore. I think of all these times. I wish I hadn't. But at the same time, it's given me an obsession and a drive that I don't know if I would have had otherwise.
Agreed.
Because of how weak I was then, it's now motivated me and inspired me and driven me to be. Now, again, there could be a downside of the obsessive nature, but I'd rather be on this side and pulling myself back a little bit as opposed to how I used to be, where I had to kick myself in the ass all the time.
Yeah.
So yes, that's a regret. That's a mistake. But it taught me the things and the perspective I have now. So it's not totally lost. Yeah. So it's fine. Whereas if, I'm sitting here thinking, well, I shouldn't have done that or whatever, there's a lot of lessons that I would have missed out on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Two more things. Another thing he said, and I thought this was interesting. You should never be 100% sure of anything and willing to question everything. What's your initial reaction to that? You should never be 100% sure of anything and willing to question everything.
So I think that applies to 99%. And again, this is 100% me. And the only thing that I am not, and I don't know if I ever can be, but I strive to be 100% sure. And that's just like my relationship Christ, right? Like that's it. Like that's the only thing that I want. I shouldn't strive to question that.
But are you 100% sure that's real?
But that's what I'm saying is there's 100% that there are doubts, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like I go through this and I'm like, oh man. But
to me, that's faith though, right?
I agree.
If you're not 100% sure, if you were 100% sure, there's no faith involved. You wouldn't have to be faithful.
Yes.
But you are faithful.
Yes. But I think that
because there's that smidge of doubt in there.
1,000,000%. But what I'm saying though, I think what he's trying to say is, look, you can't be 100, strive not to be 100% sure of anything and to question everything. I strive to get to the point where I'm 100% sure.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate. There's no question There's no questions in my mind. There's no questions on how everything, like I am 100% sure that, my faith in Jesus and what the Bible says is true, and there's zero questions. But I think you talk to some of the best teachers, the best scholars, the best pastors, the best, like the top of the top. None of them can honestly say, yeah, I'm 100% sure either.
Yeah. I think if you gave everybody truth serum, there's nobody that would say they're 100% sure.
But it's just like perfection, right? Like nobody can be perfect. Nobody cannot mess up. Nobody. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't strive for that.
Sure.
To be more like the perfect example of that. But again, also, I think, to your point, what you're trying to say to me is that understand that, give yourself grace in that because that is a point of it, right? Is if you're wrestling with something to rest on that, okay, look, I'm not 100% sure. And I'm not don't beat yourself up over that. But I think everything else is right.
The main point they were making, which is even if you feel really good about a decision, you feel really good about something, still leave yourself some grace to know that you could be wrong.
Yeah.
Have that humility, in other words, of I could be wrong in this.
Yeah.
Think about if we had some humility and grace the last 3 years, some of our leaders and officials, to have the grace that they could be wrong.
Yeah.
They're going to make the best decision with the facts and information they have today.
Yeah.
But there's a chance we could be wrong here.
Yeah.
And if there was some grace there and some leeway and they weren't 100% sure they were right, we might have seen a little bit more humility the last few years.
100%. Yeah.
So I think that's the point is.
Yeah. And I think that's great. Because as it relates to this conversation and decisions in life and stuff, there's no way to be 100% sure. You could, even with Tiffany and I have 0.0000001% question in my mind, about her. But
son of zeros, bro.
To say, I know, but to say with 100% certainty that she couldn't fall out of love with me. I mean, I've done some pretty gross stuff, If she's not already fallen out of love with me already. But what I'm saying though is you can be sure about anything. You can be sure about your kids and you can be sure about all these things, but to say that you don't, and not to acknowledge that, hey, there's still some doubt somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I think is not being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Again, I think the point is it gives you grace or it gives you space for humility and not to be so sure of everything.
Yeah.
In whatever given subject.
Yeah.
That you're not willing to look at alternative options, alternative answers, alternative ways of going about it.
Yeah.
Don't ever, whatever decision is you're making, don't go so far in thinking that you have it all figured out that you're not willing to open up and hear a different perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's the point.
Yep. I like it.
And then this last one, this could be a 30-second discussion or it could be a 3-hour discussion. I don't know where this is going to go.
Okay.
This is about to be a mind blender, a brain blender here for you.
Let's meet somewhere in the middle.
Ready for this?
45 seconds.
Now, this deserves more.
How long? Are you 3 hour intro or 3 hour conversation?
This deserves more research, more, because I know he's done a whole episode on this topic, and I need to revisit that. I've heard it before, but it was a while back, and I just need to revisit it. But Sam Harris, if you don't know who he is, he's an atheist, and he's a 100% believer that there's no such thing as free will, at all. There's no free will. He said free will is an illusion, and that's where he goes. So free will is an illusion. Even ideas and thoughts you believe to be in your control were not created by you.
And he's an atheist?
He's an atheist. And let me explain a little bit. And again, I want to do more. I want to hear more about his perspective because I may do a bad job of speaking on his behalf.
This could be one of our episodes for sure.
Yeah. So his thought is free will is a myth because he said, and the example he always uses, think about, any movie you could possibly think of that's ever been creative. Think about it.
Got it.
You got a movie in your head?
Got it.
He says, even that thought, whatever popped into your head, there was 1,000 other movies that could have popped in your head. Mm-hmm. That movie did not come into your head because of a choice that you made. It just came to you. So that's one of the examples he uses. Another example he uses, you didn't choose where you were born. You didn't choose the parents you were born to. Yep. You didn't choose the family that you were born into. You didn't choose any of that. None of that was up to you. Mm-hmm. Where it starts to get tricky in my mind and my brain is, okay, I'm going to choose to pick up this cup and take a drink from it.
Yeah.
So that has to be free will.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I want to dive more into his, I'm not sure he's stating the individual, like small, tiny little choices. Mm-hmm. But even that, again, I want to get into more of that.
He paints it with a broad brush, it sounds like. Haven't heard the episode either. But
I want to go back and listen to it because I'm doing a terrible job because it actually makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
I did not choose, because even like, let's take fitness for an example.
Yeah.
Free will would say, I'm choosing to live a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah.
But his point is, well, what created you to have that thought that you were going to travel down a healthier lifestyle? Mm-hmm. You didn't make that thought in your head.
Yeah.
That came to you.
Yeah. I think it's kind of the idea of like Inception, like the movie Inception. Have you seen that? Mm-hmm. So
great film.
It's hit or miss with Ben. You never know what movies he's seen or hasn't seen. But is that, yes, you may make a decision, but it's because you were influenced either over and over throughout your life to make that decision.
Right.
So I understand that, but to, I think, paint a broad brush of like, hey, free will, that's big. That's big because.
What's your problem with it?
Because like your example to like follow or not follow instincts, right? Think about.
I didn't create the instinct that I'm thirsty right now, or to create the thought that I should take a drink. Again, I'm arguing.
Yeah, but you can make two. But there's two choices on it,
right?
Right, and anytime there's one or the other, that's not another decision that makes you do one or the other. It's like, okay, hey, I can follow that instinct that maybe it was created by something else and I followed that instinct. So I was led by that instinct. Or I can fight that instinct and do something else, which you can say, okay, that's fine, but that's because I went and I learned about this on another place and they helped me make that decision. But anytime you choose good or bad, that to me is a choice of free will. Like to say that, now it's an accumulation of information to make a decision, but it is free will, one or the other.
But why did you get that decision factor and somebody else may have made the other decision? Like what chose for you to get that decision as opposed to somebody else who didn't?
That's the idea, is this free will. Like for example, like my siblings and I were raised similarly, not the same. I'm not going to say, hey, we were all raised exactly the same, because we weren't. But we were raised similarly, and there's choices each and every one of us made individually. That
where do those choices come from?
Where do the choices come from?
Yeah, like what gave you the mentality or the mindset to make a certain choice A, whereas your other sibling may have made choice B? Where did that decision point come from?
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's the individualistic cognitive function that
you had nothing to do with, right?
Yeah. See, I am a believer. I'm not an atheist, and I do believe that God created us to choose. Now, he knows what the choices are. So there's that whole debate on like, okay, hey, do you have choice if he's sovereign and he already knows what's going to happen? Like we have choices to go one way or the other. But to go back and say, well, where did that decision come from? It came from in here. So it was my individual. Nobody else controls me. I'm not a puppet. I do have the ability to say, like, I'm making up words as I'm talking. I'm choosing the words as I'm talking. I could use different words to say the same thing.
But where did those words come from?
Now you're just playing. But again,
your personality
anytime you have a fork in the road and you either choose the right road or left road, that is a choice that you make. But to say that the decision to go left, that wasn't your choice. Yes, it was, because I could have gone right.
Right.
And I chose that I'm going that way.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to, I don't know I'm just trying to argue. I don't know his point well enough to argue.
I get it.
But you're coming up to two choices. Things out of my control are determining which choice that I'm going to go with based on my personality, based on my experience, based on things that are out of my control, are guiding me one way or the other. Yeah. I think that's the point. So yes, I'm making the decision, but the decision is being made through forces that are outside of my control. So I'm with you. It's like that's an uncomfortable feeling because you're right. Like the puppet thing, like that doesn't make sense to me either. Yeah. So I don't think there's anybody who's pulling strings. But outside of your
control, like I do feel like you do have control on the information that you either consume or allow to enter into, your cognitive processing.
You don't have control over the ideas that pop in your head.
That's not true. That's not true. I can think of things. Yes, like there's times like, when you like, hey, don't think about this, and then you think about it. Like you have the ability to control some of the thoughts that come into your head. Like, and you have the ability to control the free will. But why did
something else not come into your head in that moment?
But the free will, well, if you're thinking about something, like if you cognitively are like, okay, yes, I want that to come into my mind. But again, whatever thoughts in your head is a completely different matter when it's talking about free will. Whatever thought or intuition comes into your head, you still have the ability and free will to choose one or the other.
Yeah, and it is like the movie example. If I say choose any movie and you choose Sandlot, you thought I'm going to choose Sandlot.
Yeah, see, you didn't put that in my head. I chose Braveheart.
Okay, you chose Braveheart.
Yeah.
But what kept you from
didn't force that into my head?
But what kept you from choosing Sandlot as your favorite movie? Why didn't you didn't have the free will that Sandlot was the first thing that popped into your mind? Braveheart was the first thing that popped into your mind.
Yeah, because I chose Braveheart. Why?
But it didn't come from you is his point. It came because again, you could have chosen 1,000 different movies. And Braveheart was the first one that came to your head that you thought of. That's the one I'm going to think of here.
Because I chose that's my favorite movie of all time. I could see 1 million different movies, okay?
Yep.
You've seen 1 million different movies. Which one is your favorite?
I have no idea. There's a lot of good ones.
Okay. Anything that's in your top 5.
Sandlot.
Okay, Sandlot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I could have chosen
But you didn't.
Gladiator.
But you didn't.
That's the point. Yeah. Why did I choose Sandlot?
Because you said, okay, there's enough about that movie that I like it better than the other ones, at least in this moment right now.
Or at least it's the one that's coming into the forefront.
Yeah.
But what if you ask me tomorrow and Forrest Gump is the one that pops into my head? Because I think about it a little
tomorrow
more.
At that moment, that's your favorite movie. So that's your choice. That wasn't forced upon you because of outside factors that you don't control.
I don't think it's a forcing upon you. I think it's just where does it come from?
Well,
that's what I'm curious about.
If it's not your choice and it is making decisions for you or ideas are coming to you, then that ultimately says that, okay, something is putting them there.
Yeah.
That is not you.
This is a mind blender.
Yeah.
I want you to listen to that episode.
I would love to have an intellectual battle with Sam Harris in person about this topic. Because I'm pretty sure I would destroy him.
I'm pretty sure you're smarter than him, for sure.
I'm way more smarter, and I know way many more things. Yeah. And it wouldn't even be a fight.
Yeah, I want to explore it more. It does make sense to me though that there's, again, the way that I am, I had no choice over. Yeah. I didn't choose to be obsessed with fitness. I didn't choose to be born where I was born. I didn't choose to have the family that I have. There's so much in my life I did not choose. I didn't make the I didn't choose to be attracted to females. Like it just always has been.
Yeah.
That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so now that you're starting to say there's no such thing as free will, it's like that intrigues me. That's an intriguing thought because I don't want to believe it. Everything in me fights that, is fighting that because I want to think that I have agency over everything. But the reality is I think that because that's the way that I was wired, which I had nothing to do with. Whereas somebody else like Sam Harris is wired to think a different way.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating.
Yeah, you need to send me that episode.
Let's do
so
it.
like play it on your phone, record it on something else, and then text it to me so I don't have to pay the $8.
So you don't have to pay the $8.
Yeah.
I think the $8 is money well spent when it comes to Sam Harris. Because if nothing else, he's gonna challenge your beliefs. If nothing else.
Yeah.
And to me, that's worth that's worth $8.
Yeah, I love that.
Because I don't agree with everything he says.
Yeah. No,
But he makes me think in a way that other podcasts I listen to don't.
Yeah.
Because it's so different than what I typically think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
interesting.
I knew we could go. Let's cut it off there because we'll
come back. We'll revisit that because
Yeah.
I think that is a good.
I was more arguing from just for the argument's sake.
Yeah.
But I wish I knew more so that I could push, because there were points you made were like, well, I agree with them, so I guess I can't really push back there.
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know. It's just.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know of anybody that thinks that free will is a myth? Like, do you know anybody personally that thinks free will is a myth?
I don't know if I've ever asked anybody.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
I don't think I know anybody personally that thinks free will is a myth.
But that goes back to conversation we had yesterday is if this idea is brand new and nobody else feels that way, maybe question it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I don't think nobody feels that way. But, the old school religion was you didn't have any agency. Like, it was all, what's it called? Determinism, right? Your life's determined, everything's determined.
Yeah.
That's not, you don't have free will in that. So that's how religion was taught in some certain sectors.
Yeah, that's true. And again,
like as a fire and brimstone God, like some people are chosen and some people aren't.
And that's what's crazy is if he's an atheist, right? Like there's a legitimate debate about sovereignty versus free will. Like, hey, if he's sovereign, how can you have free will? Like, because he already sees what's going to happen, already knows what's going to happen, then we're predestined.
So I talked to a guy, and I know you probably got to go, but I talked to a guy. He's a pastor at a church, local church here.
Yeah.
And he 100% believes that God doesn't know the decisions we're about to make. He thinks God created us, and again, I'm trying to explain somebody else's thoughts that they've clearly spent time thinking about. But the synopsis is he created us, he made us who we are, but each individual decision is a surprise to him. We choose along the path to go down whatever direction we're going to go down, and God doesn't necessarily know that. So I definitely have never heard a pastor say that. For sure. Because I've always heard the same thing you're saying, like we have choice, but he knows the choice.
Yeah.
But then there's the absence of free will if he knows what you're about to choose.
And you think how many times the Bible says, and God was pleased.
Yeah.
Right? If he was pleased, then there has to be some element of surprise there, right? Because it's like, hey, I already know exactly what's going to happen. It's like seeing a movie. I don't know. It's like because that was a bad example because I've watched movies like 10 times and I still like, yeah, that was good. That was really good. But at the same time, it's like if he was pleased at a decision that we made, then I guess there's got to be some element that he didn't know if we were going to make a bad decision or a good decision, and he was displeased.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you know better. Like, why did you make that decision? And then you just think about Old Testament, like his conversations with like Moses and like all the stuff like, with the Israelites and, hey, he brings them out of Egypt and then, in a matter of months, like they're worshiping idols, right? Mm-hmm. And then he gets pissed and wants to destroy them all. So it's like, again, did he know that was going to happen? Then why would he be so upset?
I guess it's like if you really want to take the father analogy that's so common.
Yeah.
Your kids.
Yeah.
You know your kids better than anybody.
Yeah.
And you've taught them things, but you don't know what they're about to do.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that analogy.
Yeah.
Like you think you know what they're going to choose and you hope that you've bred into them what the the right decisions, but you don't know.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like
it's hard.
That
it's
analogy.
Hard, right? Because
it's always felt weird to me that there is a God that literally dictates everything in my life.
Yeah.
That's always been a weird thought to me.
Yeah.
And this is a longer discussion, but when people say God's plan for me, that's always been I've always struggled with that thought.
Yeah.
Like, you mean to tell me there's God's puppeting 7 billion people on earth and he knows exactly the next move and the next plan and every single thing that they're going to do? Like, that's always been a struggle of a thought for me. I gravitate more honestly towards he created, and then now the rest is up to us. And again, now he gave us skills, he gave us talents, he gave us desires, but what we do with those may be a little bit of a surprise. I don't know. Again, mind blender.
Yeah. Thank you to Choctaw Casino.
Yeah, there's no resolution. I just thought it was a fascinating, and the whole episode was fascinating. And it was discussions like that and thoughts like that I've been doing a lot of thinking about lately. It's just life in general. So anyway, not sure. Just hopefully, if nothing else, that episode maybe made you think a little bit.
Yeah.
And get curious about something. Right. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you have a great rest of the day. Go leave us a review. We're doing the contest for the rest of the month. Leave a 5-star rating and a comment. Screenshot it. DM us on our Instagram. And then you'll be entered into a contest. We're going to give away a variety pack of Jocko Fuel.
Let's go.
Jocko Go. So appreciate you guys. That helps us out a ton when you do that type thing. So anyway, any closing thoughts, words?
Nah, man. My mind's blown right now. So I'm putting any more thoughts together.
You're gonna go.
Probably not a good idea.
Yeah, you're gonna go. What's it? You're gonna go think about those things. So anyway, hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Great weekend. We'll see you next week.